Well, hello there, and welcome to our study in the book of Revelation. I am so thankful for you to be with me. Revelation chapter 16, verses 12 through 16. Last time, as you might recall, we covered the first, 5 of the bowls of wrath. Tonight, we're going to cover the 6th bowl of wrath, and it's quite intense. As we do that, though, let's come here. Let's see what I got here. I thought I was supposed to have something. Oh, yeah, there's that. Okay, this is what we covered last time. Fourth angel is going to pour out the bowl of wrath, and then the fifth angel is going to pour out his bowl of wrath. People are going to gnaw on their tongues in anguish and curse God. Amazing. You thought they would have come to their senses, but they did not. Okay, and so this is the review of what we saw last time. We've covered the first 5. All right, here behind the blue, yeah, you get the first 2. There are the School of Biblical Studies questions for you. But you'll see them anyway. Now they're behind the map. But they'll show up eventually. Eventually you'll get them. Okay. Chapter 16 and verse 12, as we begin looking at new material. The 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And so in the 6th bowl, we're going to see that we're going to have the river Euphrates is going to be dried up. You might recall in the 5th bowl, let's go back and see that. In the 5th bowl, we're going to have darkness that is going to be poured out on the throne of the beast. I think that's setting up what's taking place in the 6th bowl, which we have right here. And the great river Euphrates is going to be dried up. Now, here's a map for you. The river Euphrates is really a river that has been with us from the very beginning of history. You might recall that this is one of those rivers that's even flowing out of or in the area of the, can't get it out of my head, Garden of Eden. Thank you. The Garden of Eden. That's exactly right. And so the Euphrates River has been with us from the beginning. Many folks believe that the Garden of Eden, I don't know why I can't keep it in my head. The Garden of Eden might have been positioned somewhere in this area right here. But whatever, we've got the Euphrates River as it's coming down here, and it trickles into the Persian Gulf. But along the great Euphrates River, we've got the city of Babylon. The Tower of Babel will be built somewhere in this particular area, etc. So it's a very, very important river as far as biblical history is concerned. You might see Ur of the Chaldees down here where Abraham starts out. You might recall Abraham is going to follow the Fertile Crescent. He's going to come up this direction, and he's going to come down into the Promised Land. This is all just very, very difficult desert land. And so you didn't generally, if you wanted to go over here to Jerusalem from Babylon, you didn't generally come this direction because you don't have any water for your animals. You come up this way, or if you're going the other way, you come this way, okay? But anyhow, so you got the river Euphrates. It's a very, very important river. Now, I want to identify something with it. We've got Babylon here, which is very important. And I want you to see Rome, which is very important over here. Babylon first. Babylon used the great Euphrates River as part of its defensive mechanism. So the Euphrates was very, very important to them as far as the empire is concerned, as well as the city of Babylon is concerned. But I'm also told that the Roman Empire kind of gauged their empire as the outer limits. The Euphrates River was kind of the outer limits and the border of their empire for a while. And so they also saw it in that regard. The reason that's important to our story, as you can probably see here, is that it probably, in being used here in chapter 16 and verse 12, it probably is representing God's restraint on Satan. That he's loosed that restraint. And Satan now is going to have, and all of the minions of the devil and the beast and all of that, they're going to gather together a great army, and this army is going to end up in Armageddon, the Mount Megiddo, which is actually a plain area where a lot of the battles in the Bible and other places, other things that history have taken place. And so what we're seeing here is that the curse or the bowl of wrath is that God is now going to take away the limitations, and we're going to see that the invading armies are going to be able to come in, and specifically the kings from the east. Okay, this is east over here, that's west over there, and so the kings from the east will be able to come in this direction. I don't think it necessarily necessarily has anything to do with it, but China, if you go way, way over there, that would be China, okay? But anyhow, there you go. All right, moving on. Then we got the sixth angel is going to pour out the bowl, the Euphrates. The water's going to dry up, and the reason that happens is to prepare the way for the kings of the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits, and they were like frogs. We'll deal with that frogs thing here in just a moment. But here you have other places within the book of Revelation on the parchment here, other places in the book of Revelation where you find those entities that are mentioned and the deceptive nature of those entities. First of all, the dragon, back in chapter 12, and the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the world. So what's going to happen is we're seeing now that these frogs are going to come out of the mouth. There's going to be a frog comes out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet. And these are representing evil spirits. And here you see that the dragon was known for his deception. Same thing is true of the beast. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon, interestingly enough. Okay, this is the second beast that we're seeing back in chapter 13. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth. So just like its master, the dragon, Satan, it has the power of deception. Okay, and then Revelation 19 and verse 20, talking about the false prophet, the third entity that is mentioned in our text. And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, who in its presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshiped its image. I know that's a lot of material, but I just want you to see, how the Bible, is consistent. And so there you see all 3 of those entities that are wrapped up in chapter 16 and verse 13. All 3 of them have been mentioned earlier. Well, these 2 earlier and this one later on. But all of them are very deceptive in their characteristics. Now, what I want to pause for a moment and remind you of is something I started out many, many, many weeks ago, months ago for that matter, with regards to the book of Revelation. And that is that as we traverse this marvelous book and recognize that there's a blessing to be had from it, it's very important that we also allow the parallels to play out. And we see them and we're consistent with them, etc. One of the things I tried to establish early on, and it's part of my eschatology, a developing part of my eschatology, and that is that God, throughout history, seems to take a microcosm, a small something, and blow it into a macrocosm as far as fulfillment of prophecy. He'll take something that is very small, and that happens. It takes place, and then it gives us a reference point. It gives us history. It shows us how people dealt with it in that particular limited kind of a mode, only to see later on that the macrocosm would take place. Microcosm, macrocosm, and there's many examples of that throughout history and throughout biblical history specifically. If you're interested, go back to some of my very first lessons on the book of Revelation, and you'll see some of that history. But what I wanted to do here is I just wanted to show you that what we're seeing in this passage as it plays out is we're seeing, again, I think, a macrocosm of a microcosm moment. Okay? Now, I want to take you back, if you'll allow me. We got the great Euphrates River. There's many who interpret this with regards to the Euphrates. They would take and these folks are called amillennial by those who are not very educated. Really, it's a present millennial kind of a situation where they believe that we're presently in the millennium now, okay? They would make the interpretation that this is not happening in the future, this idea of the Euphrates being dried up, etc. It's not going to happen in the future. It happened in the past, and it all has to do with Rome, okay? Rome definitely does fall. Rome, there's many parallels. I believe that there's much in the book of Revelation that is actually referring to the time of Roman conquering of Israel. Jerusalem's going to fall under Titus, and Titus is going to just decimate the place. All of those kind of persecutions take place. The horrible things that happen to our brothers and sisters in Christ, being thrown to the lions, all of that stuff, I believe also is being depicted and represented in the book of Revelation, but I don't believe that that's the end of the story, as so many amillennial people do. I am of the odd persuasion, because I don't know of anybody else who takes this persuasion. I'm of the odd persuasion that both the Roman moment and a moment to come takes place. Much like the consistent nature of God, where he has often had a microcosm, a very small situation, that develops into a macrocosm. I think that that's what's being predicted, talked about in this marvelous revelation that we're dealing with here. And so, yes, I believe that the time of Rome conquering Jerusalem, all of those things plays into what is being described as the persecutions in the book of Revelation. But I don't believe that that's the end of it. I believe that was the microcosm preparing for us examples, etc., that John's actually going to use through the gift of the Holy Spirit. He's actually going to use the book of Revelation, preparing us for a macrocosm that is yet to come. What does that then have to do with what we're talking about right now? Well, it has a lot to do with this idea of deception, because I am convinced that what we are seeing right now in these last days is a macrocosm deception that is taking place. This is a worldwide situation. We just recently endured our first worldwide pandemic. And so many of us are really alarmed, and we're worried, and we're seeing that God seems to now be dealing with us as a planet, not just as nations on the planet, as he's done in the past. And when you macrocosm that, or you see it in a big view, and you reference the microcosm of what took place back in the day with Israel, or specifically Jerusalem, and Rome coming down to conquer the Jews and all those kinds of, that's a microcosm. Then you see the macrocosm that is yet to come. I think that you see actually a blending and a harmony between the two views that would be called amillennial, or what I think is more appropriately called present millennial and premillennial. I think that both of them have a lot of accuracy, and if we'll allow ourselves a moment of humility, we might actually see that they have some agreement, microcosm, macrocosm, that can take place. However you play that out, the idea of deception, wow, is that not alive and well in our world today? Think about the news media and the way that they spin anything. Think about your friends on social media and the way that you can back them into a corner. They know that they're wrong, but they wouldn't admit they're wrong for nothing. And so they spin it. They'll do anything, including at the end of the day, when they finally have to confront, yes, I am wrong. Instead of doing that, they'll say, you have no right to judge me. We are a world that has been totally duped, totally deceived by what is taking place around about us. The evil is all about us. And so I believe that we are in a time of macrocosm fulfillment with regards to what's being predicted here in the book of Revelation. All right. There, finally, we got another look. You guys can see all of the pictures there, or all the questions there. Sorry that I didn't have that up prior to that. Okay, now, as we move further, we got the sixth angel, and the sixth angel, I'll stand over here because I'm in the way. The sixth angel has poured out the bowl of wrath, the sixth bowl of wrath, and this bowl of wrath essentially is just going to dry up the Euphrates River so that the kings of the east can come and invade, okay? And then we're going to see a secondary part of this bowl of wrath is going to be the demonic presence that come out of the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And they are like frogs. They're like frogs. That's kind of interesting that they're like frogs. And the reason it's interesting is because I went back through the seven bowls of wrath. Of course, we're at number 6 here, so we only got one left. But I went back through them, and it's really quite remarkable to me that all of them, except for number 4, has a direct parallel to the way God decimated Egypt back in the day under Moses. The first one, of course, you got boils or sores that come upon. And then the next two, this is the water, it turns to blood in the sea. The third one is the water turns to blood in the rivers and tributaries, that kind of thing. Number 4 is when the sun scorches the earth. We don't have really a parallel there as far as the plagues are concerned. But then number 5, we got darkness. Number 6, we got frogs, which we were talking about now. And number 7, which we'll see next time, hail. 100-pound hail that falls from the heavens, okay? So it's just kind of interesting how God does this. And if you allow me, I've already kind of made the point, but maybe you aren't seeing it. Microcosm, macrocosm. How in Egypt, God takes a situation that is small. It's just one local area as far as, a country is concerned. But then later, many years later, he develops that into a macrocosm, kind of a punishment that comes down upon the planet. And so you see the dualism as far as fulfillment is concerned here, and how that it is very possible, I am convinced, that much of what the present millennialists say and much of what the present millennialists say, both of them are accurate. I believe that the present millennialists are actually dealing with the microcosm kind of a fulfillment, and the premillennialists are dealing with a macrocosm, the bigger fulfillment, but that doesn't make them necessarily wrong. So these unclean spirits are going to be depicted as frogs, which is, that's just an oddity to me as to why that would be the imagery that God would present as far as an unclean spirit is concerned. I'm not aware, perhaps you are, and if you are, please comment, but I'm not aware that frogs and demons have anything necessarily connected as far as history is concerned. Perhaps I'm ignorant, and I am ignorant. You need to teach me, but perhaps you know something else. But it's just an interesting imagery that we have here. And again, we've got a parallel to what took place back in Egypt in the day. Now, I want to pause for a moment, and I want to deal with these unclean spirits. Let's see what I have in my neck now. I don't want to go there yet. All right, I want to pause and deal with these unclean spirits. Notice, if you will, that they are going to be coming from the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Okay? And also notice that they are demonic spirits that will perform signs and go abroad to the kings of the world. And they're going to assemble them in this great Armageddon battle that is going to take place. But the demonic presence is an interesting discussion. Perhaps one day we'll have an entire class on this particular subject matter. But much like the present millennial and the premillennials, our fellowship tends to also be divided into two groups with regards to those who believe that God still does miracles today and those who believe that he doesn't do miracles today. I am of the ones who believe, because I'm not going to quench the spirit. I don't want to go there. But I have many friends who believe that 1 Corinthians chapter 13, for instance, indicates that when the Bible is completed, then all miracles will cease. I think they're taking that way out of context, because I think 1 Corinthians 13 is about love, not the completion of the Bible. But that's a whole different story. That said, I just want you to understand, and I want you to recognize the difficulty that often plays out between many in the amillennial view and the premillennial view. And by the way, many in the amillennial view believe that God no longer operates in a miraculous way in the world today. And many of those in the premillennial view believe that God does operate in miraculous ways today. And the reason there's a divide there is because those who believe that, for instance, Satan is being bound right now by the authority of Jesus under the authority of the church, that would be the present millennialists, they also believe that that is showing itself by a lack of demonic presence in our world today, a lack of direct miraculous events in our world today as far as God is concerned, that kind of thing. Now, again, I'm a doubter of that because I believe that Satan is alive and well and doing big things, going big guns, and he's like a roaring lion looking who he can devour, but if he's on a chain, how much damage can he do? I really struggle. I think it's probably one of the biggest weaknesses that the present millennialists have, and that is trying to put in the timeline where Satan is released for a short time before he is thrown into the pit forever. They really struggle with that part of the timeline. But in fairness to what their position is, they believe that he is right now presently bound. Okay? And though I doubt that, that's the way they believe. And so they also translate that into many other things. It allows them to also make the point, well, then that's why we don't see the demonic possessions, people being possessed by evil spirits today. That's why we do not see direct intervention of God as far as miraculous things are concerned. I believe that it is true that the interaction between God and man and this planet as far as miraculous things, the intensity has died down. I think that I don't know how you could deny that, at least in America, but I don't think that you can come to the conclusion that Satan is completely bound because of just the enormity of what he is doing and the perversion that he is doing. And the idea that when you study the passage, it talks about the dragon is going to be bound. It's not just limited. You find that in that passage, it's a rather hopeful passage of a time when deception is not going to exist as it does today. And yet we continue to see the great deceiver is deceiving all over the planet. So I really struggle, again, with the present millennial timeline with regards to when the Satan is bound. But I'm trying to explain to you why they would deny the idea of demonic presence. If you've ever traveled to a third world country, which I have not, but had many friends tell me about, and in fact, I had a very good friend who for many years served as an elder of the Lord's church, who told me, who grew up in Africa, who told me he's seen people who were demon possessed. He knows what that looks like, etc., in third world countries and places of that nature. I think we see demon possession even in America today. I think that there are some things that take. I have sat across the table. There have been times when I've been called to prisons or jails to do prison and jail ministry, and I've sat across the table and looked into the eyes of people who you could see that the holiness of their existence have been completely drained from them. You talk about evil. You could just you felt it. You could almost smell it in the room. I believe that there is still that kind of evil today. And so I am convinced that this kind of thing is playing out right before our eyes, even to this day. All right, now I said all of that. Now let's move on. Here we go. Oh, baloney. It went too fast. What in the world? All right, now we're down to a part that, again, gets me in trouble, but I think it's very important for us to see it. For they are demonic spirits performing signs and go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God Almighty. So this is a massive battle that's going to take place. And as this massive battle takes place between the faithful of God and the wicked, we're seeing that there's a warning, a rather interesting warning. You see it's in red here. If you got a red letter edition of your Bible, it's in red there, because these are the words of Jesus himself. In verse 15, Jesus is going to give some instructions to somebody. And what I want to deal with as far as controversy is concerned, who is this somebody? Remember, the church is supposed to be out of here. The church does not show up in the middle chapters of the book of Revelation, according to the premillennial, specifically within the premillennial, according to the pre-tribulation folks. So the church is gone. So who's he talking to in this particular passage when he gives this warning? Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. If the church is done gone, this particular warning, it seems to be lost on the church. We don't need that. We don't need to be awake because we're already with the Lord, right? So why give it to the church? Now, I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, well, this isn't really to the church. This is to those who have come to the Lord during the Great Tribulation, which we're talking about with the bowls of wrath here. That's interesting, but I'm not so sure but what it might be just a little bit of a stretch. Let me see if my clicker here will work. And I want to take you to this next slide. These passages sound so much alike to me. Now, here's the passage we just had on our screen, okay? And many will say that this passage was not written to the church, because if you say that this passage was written to the church, then it undermines the pre-trib assumption that there's going to be a rapture and the church is out of here. So when we get to chapter 16 and verse 15, he can't be talking to the church because the church is done gone. The church doesn't need the admonition to keep your pants on and to stay awake, because we're already with the Lord. We don't need it. So this has to be talking about those who are still on the planet. The problem with that is it sounds a lot like this passage, which definitely was written to the church at Thessalonica. Paul's going to say to them, and notice I've just kind of given you a compilation of the verses here to get the point. For you yourselves fully are aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief. That's kind of what he said over here, isn't it? Like a thief. But there's more. Like a thief in the night. But you are not in darkness, brothers, that the day should surprise you like a thief. Again, another reference. But since you belong to the day, let us be sober. That sober is very much like of staying awake. That's what soberness, it doesn't mean don't be drunk. What it means is that you need to have your mind sober-minded. You need to be alert, okay? So stay awake or be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. Now that sounds a whole lot like this idea, keep your garments on so you're not running around naked. Except here he says to the church, basically, you need to keep your armor on. That's rather interesting. Keep your armor on. Keep your clothes on. You know, see, it's very, very similar. Is it not possible that this passage could be written to the church? Because we've already got language in the Bible that's almost exactly the same that was written, we know, to the church. I'm going to draw this conclusion. The church just simply has to prepare for spiritual warfare. I'm really concerned that some of us who are just so invested in this pre-tribulation exit are failing to truly keep on the battle clothes. Because I think so many of us, we feel like we're not going to go through it. We don't have to experience that. We don't have to keep that armor on. We don't have to develop that kind of spiritual muscle because we're going to be out of here. We're not going to have to go through that. And I'm not sure that's the case at all. Notice what I go on to say. We may not be the target of God's wrath. Notice that's exactly what he says here in verse 9. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through it. And yet, in the very context, he says right before that God hasn't destined us for wrath, that we need to keep on the armor. Now hold it. I'm not going to have to go through wrath. So what do I need armor for? Is it possible that the reason you need your armor is because even though you are not the target of God's wrath, you are going to journey through his wrath with him under his banner of protection? Much like the ancient Egyptians, which, by the way, in context, was just referenced to with all the 6 of the 7 of our bowls of wrath have a direct parallel to Egypt. Why isn't it possible he's keeping that particular analogy going in their mind? Remember what happened to the ancient Jews. When the ancient Hebrews back in the day, they were protected from the wrath of God, even though they went through the wrath of God. The death angel, the plagues on Egypt, specifically the death angel, put the blood on the doorframe, and you will travel through the wrath of God, although you are not the target of the wrath of God. I'm just really concerned that there are too many of us who are preaching these absolute certainties that we're out of here, when I don't see that the book of Revelation necessarily says that at all. He says that we are not the target of God's wrath, but we got to put on the armor, because we might very well have to travel through God's wrath, but yet under the banner of his protection. I want to return you again one more time, if you'll allow me, to this growing list of descriptions of the church, I believe, in the middle chapters of the book of Revelation. Now, I'm not saying that that's definitely it, because I'm just as dumb as the next guy, but I'm just putting together the evidence. I'm trying to not let great grandpa be the only authority in the room. I'm trying to let the Bible actually speak for itself. And I want to remind you, Esther, God's not mentioned one time in the entire book of Esther. But you're an ignoramus if you can read the book of Esther and not see God all over the pages of the book of Esther. He's described there repeatedly, even though he's not mentioned specifically. And I think it's possible that the same thing is true of the book of Revelation. Notice this list that just seems to be talking about qualities with regards to the church. The last one that I've just now added is chapter 16. The Lord's warning to remain awake and dressed for battle sounds a lot like the exact warning given to the church of Thessalonica in 5:20. It sounds just like what he said to the church at Thessalonica, and yet he's saying this now in the book of Revelation, and this is in the middle chapters. So is it possible, then, I ask one more time, that the church might very well have to travel through the wrath of God? Notice how I said that, through the wrath of God, though not being the target of the wrath of God. I had a church leader just recently challenge me on this, and he said, yeah, but Sonny, that can't be, because then we know that many of those folks are going to be beheaded. I ask you, who beheads them? It ain't God. Those who are being beheaded are not the subject of God's wrath. They are individuals who are being beheaded because they are under the persecution of the world. So I just ask you to be very, very careful with, let me just go back one last time and show it to you. Just be very careful not to lift things out of context. In verse 8, he clearly says, put on your armor. In verse 9, he says, you're not destined for wrath. What do I need armor for if I'm not destined for wrath? Because I'm not the subject of the wrath, but I'm in the battle that goes through the wrath under the banner of God. I think that's very, very likely. And I think that we need more preachers who are willing to step up and to face the hard reality of that, so that the church will not be unprepared, but keep their pants on. As you come on down here then to verse 15, behold, I'm coming like a thief. We just talked about that. Sounds so much like 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And then in conclusion, he says, and they assembled them at the place that in the Hebrew is called Armageddon. Did a little word search, word study of the original language. And in the Hebrew, the word Armageddon actually means Mount Megiddo. In ancient Israel, though, Megiddo was actually a plain. It was a kind of a plain area and perfectly fit for battle. And there were several key battles that actually occurred there. And so when we have reference to this plain of Megiddo or Armageddon, we have reference to, again, probably a microcosm, macrocosm kind of a scenario. Is it literal? Is it figurative? I don't know. But what I do know is that I believe it is yet to come in a macrocosm kind of a way. Now, let me back out of here one more time. There are the questions that we tried to cover. I hope we did a good job. It's kind of an odd lesson, but I think we did pretty good. And so there they are. You got them? I want to come back. I just want to leave that list there for you. I wish some of you would challenge me on that, and you would just go through that and show me, just Sonny, that is so silly. You obviously are not seeing the church, and just kind of go through that list and show me, because I'll tell you what, folks, that's becoming quite a, and we're only in chapter 16. There's 22 chapters as we pedal through this kind of thing, and we know that the church is going to be mentioned in the last chapter. So is the church mentioned in the middle chapter of the book of Revelation? It sure seems to be described there. All right, one last time. There they are. Which way do I go? This way. There they are. There's your questions. Thank you for joining me. I love you. I'm so very, very grateful. This is Sonny Chow saying, be there. Matthew 16:26.